Hello! In this video, we will check if our mechanism works. In the last video, I said that in this video, we will do the clearance for the hinge and for the crank because the fork needs to have some clearance to fit in. But before doing this job, we need to test if our components are correctly aligned. As you can see, right now we have all the components needed aligned in the mechanism, but before doing the clearance, I wanted to make sure that everything will work and not do the job twice. So let's start. But how can I see if my mechanism works? Well, I just need to add the last two joints between the hinge and the fork and between the fork and the crank. So let's do this. Well, for the fork and the hinge is kind of simple. Well, let's discuss a little bit again. Let's make a recap. The crank will rotate and the fork will follow the crank, while the hinge will go left to the right and the slide will go left to the right as well. So here, between the hinge and the fork, because the fork will follow the crank, we need a revolute joint that will enable the fork to go up and down. I'm going to Ausbill joint because everything is in place. I will select the hinge and the fork. I will hide the fork and I will select the center of the hinge. I will click OK. And let's test the fork. Okay, so the fork goes up and down. Wonderful. Good. But now, the fork needs to go up and down and also needs to follow the rotational motion of the crank. So it needs to go something like this. This should be the motion of the fork. Let's look in the Ausbill joints to find out what we can use. I will select the fork, the crank, and I will put the middle of the fork. So it's not a revolute joint. What about a cylindrical? Well, it doesn't need to do something like this, like a screw. It needs to stay in a fixed point and do this motion. Well, this is called a ball motion, okay? So having here a point and the line can do a sphere around that point. There comes the ball joint. I can click OK. And now everything is in place. What I need to do is to power or the bar or the crank. But let's power the crank. Well, it doesn't quite work. Okay, let's try with the slider. As you can see, the slider kind of moves, but still it doesn't. Maybe it's from the contact set. I will delete the contact set and I will try. Okay, the slider moves, but what about the hinge? Well, nothing moves at all. And this could happen after a lot of hours of modeling, after you made the sketches and you made the measurements and you thought everything is perfect and you done all the pieces, you align them, you assemble them, and they will not work. Well, this is the moment when you'll understand the power of direct editing. But first, let's understand a little bit why this mechanism doesn't work. So let's go back when the contact set existed because we need it, and take a look at the mechanism. Well, the hinge is in 0 position, the fork is in 0 position. The problem is another one. We can observe it from this angle, but let's look a little bit at Da Vinci's sketch. So we have the hinge, the fork in 0 position as well, but there is a very important detail. in 0 position, the fork needs to be on the center of the circle. As you can see here in my fusion, the hinge is somewhere like here, but it needs to be on the center line of the circle so the mechanism should work. Because in this case, it will make a circle like this and fusion can process it. It needs to make a symmetrical circle around the crank. So the problem again is that our little fork needs to be centered with the crank. And we have two options that we'll discuss in the next video. So the option would be to move the fork and the hinge a little bit higher, or we will move the crank and the main axe a little bit lower. In the next videos, I will show you how, using direct editing, you can do this change, and we will move the crank and the main axe a little bit lower. So see you into the next videos to see how we can edit our mechanism when we see that it doesn't work and it needs to be repaired. I will save. See you into the next video.